up, or they're just not taken seriously enough. Is this going to change the playing fields?
Thanks so much. I think before I start, after having briefly perused the legislation that was signed in on Friday, I ascertained some sense of hope on social responsibility in respect of gender-based violence, femicide, child and human trafficking, etc. Remember, there's three aspects. One is the sexual offenses. Sorry, I just want to look. The sexual offense and related matters, which is part of the Criminal Law Amendment Act. The second is the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill, and the Criminal and Related Matters Amendment Bill. Now, the first, which relates in the main to the National Registry of Sexual Offenders. We have had a registry of sexual offenders, but primarily the registry was limited to some extent pedophilia, but not, for example, to men who had been on the register for having had assaulted or been a perpetrator of gender-based violence and a person responsible for femicide. So this has now been expanded. The National Register for Sexual Offenders have been expanded, but not only expanded, but also it will be kept and retained outside the prescription period for 20 years. Now, the thing that concerns me in that regard is that there's still reservation insofar as not wanting to hold that person unless and otherwise proven to be not a sexual offender by those around him. So he should not be exonerated simply because he's 20 years of saying, I'm no longer a sexual offender, are up. The third aspect in respect of the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill is very interesting, because what you're saying is not only an antithesis of what happens in the courts, in the police stations. It is what happens in courts. And what that does is that gives you a provision to have a domestic violence process done online, and also to ensure, and this is something that is absolutely vital in this piece of legislation, is the fact that any adult who is aware of abuse or violence, etc., has a responsibility to report such or will be committing an offense.
So are you saying that if I'm aware of a domestic violence situation in my neighbor's home, that it is my duty to report it? I mean, I'd be sitting at home thinking it's not my business, I don't want to interfere. Are you then suggesting that if I don't report it, is there some sort of repercussion as far as the law is concerned on me? That's the one question. The other issue as well is, how does one define domestic violence? I'm also thinking about issues around not physical violence against, the spouse or the children in the home, but just someone who rants and raves all the time. Can that be deemed as domestic violence? Being threatened, perhaps, or being verbally abused all the time. Can that be termed as domestic violence? Will it be taken seriously enough for me to take that issue to court?
Absolutely. Now, this is where the act extends itself further, the bill, sorry. On the issue of, are you responsible in terms of your neighbor? Yes. I remember during the beginning of lockdown, I had an interview with Mariam. And one of the things that we spoke about in terms of solutions, because women were being beaten and, people were unable to be at home 24/7, it was level 5. And the level of domestic violence was on the rise. And I said to Mariam at the time, I said, people need to support each other and create the kind of infrastructure of support around each other. And this is exactly in this instance what this act is saying, that if you are aware, and yes, coercive behavior that is restricting our spiritual activities, behavior that also has intention or harm to to the elderly, etc., those form part of domestic violence. Now, one of the things that are very important in terms of domestic violence and in generally in terms of the sexual offences act, criminal and sexual offences, is the fact that many people want to remain private about it, or they want it to be held in camera. So what the second bill does, the second bill allows for, in the event of a extreme situation where a person feels victimized and will be further traumatized, if they have to meet their offender in court, then such evidence that can be produced or provided will be done so in privacy through audio link mechanisms in order to protect the victim. One of the one of the increases in terms of not only domestic violence, but generally in terms of criminal sexual offenses, is the issue of human trafficking. And when I say human trafficking, you and I know this. Many children and women are missing every day in South Africa, in the world, coming in from outside of South Africa, who are used as sexual um, um, income generators. And in this instance, one would find that the perpetrators are not being able to be held accountable because of fear of these individuals, because they've been human trafficked either from outside the country or inside, of then having to be sent into the hands of a further perpetrator. So this then provides the platform to protect women, children, and any vulnerable person. Also, in terms of domestic violence, you might find situations where a lot of elderly people are badly abused. So this is where the issue of protecting holistically, yes, whether it is behavior that is coercive, what are the tendencies? A lot of people have an idea that domestic violence requires you to be beaten up. This is not the instance. It is one of the requirements, yes. But what domestic violence requires is a pattern of behavior that causes or induces harm, a threat of harm, or any kind of imminent danger against a person, be it a child, a partner, elderly, etc. So that is
Okay,
what it means. Yes.
Magdalene, I'm going to pose a question to you, but then we're going for an ad break. When we come back, you can respond to it. I'm wondering about evidence. If I am the victim of gender-based violence, be it verbal or threatening, verbally being threatened all the time or being verbally abused all the time, do I need to provide evidence? And how am I going to garner or gather that evidence? So just mull on that for a minute or two. We'll be back with you. It is exactly 8:50 a.m. This is News and Views right here on Salam Media. We're talking with Magdalene Moonsamy. She's an attorney, founder of Women's Justice Foundation. She's also an activist, and we're talking about the 3 new pieces of legislation which President Ramaphosa has introduced regarding 3 new crime laws in South Africa. So do stay with us. We'll be unpacking this and more just after the ad break. What happens that guys are
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness. And every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and freezer card calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
As some look forward to the blessings and beauty of winter, the less fortunate in South Africa are preparing for the harsh realities that this season may bring. Africa Muslims Agency on the ground distributing blankets, clothing and other essentials to thousands across the country. Sponsor a winter warmth pack for 280 rands. Call Africa Muslims Agency now on 011 834 8685. Spread warmth this winter with Africa Muslims Agency.
World-class financial services only at Sapphire Global, your financial partner. If you are looking for Islamic, Sharia, and ethical financial products, look no further. Sapphire Global offers a wide range of financial service offerings from short-term to life and investments. A full-service center with all financial requirements under one brand. Our highly skilled and experienced consultants are ready to help protect your financial future. Contact us on 041 001 0184 or visit our website on www.sapphireglobalfs.com. Sapphire Global is an authorized financial services provider.
They say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, yet many children go to school hungry because of poverty. Penny Appeal's Breakfast Club aim to get a warm, hearty meal to underprivileged children so they can spend the day prospering in their schoolwork. Help feed a needy learner by visiting our website on www.pennyappeal.org.za or call 031 1100 573 to find out how you can donate. Penny Appeal. Small change, big difference.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
It is exactly 8:54 a.m. We have about 6 minutes left to wrap up time. We're talking with Magdalene Moonsamy. She's an attorney and the founder of Women's Justice Foundation, and she's also an activist. We're talking about President Cyril Ramaphosa having signed into law 3 new pieces of legislation aimed at strengthening efforts to end gender-based violence and crime in South Africa. I do hope and pray it was as easy as that, signing in the legislation and hoping and praying that this all is going to disappear overnight. Magdalene, welcome back, and your response to my question before the ad break.
Sorry, can you repeat the question for me again? I was
Okay, no worries. Regarding physical, verbal abuse and verbal threats.
the evidence.
And the evidence, and is that sufficient enough for me to go to court? What sort of recourse do I have? That's the one question. Another very important question, Magdalene, is oftentimes we take these matters to court. The perpetrator is then fined or jailed or whatever the case may be, but his behavior doesn't change. We need to have mechanisms in place for changes of behavior in the perpetrator. That should be part of this whole, all of these new pieces of legislation that's meant to be protecting us, the weak, the vulnerable, women and children.
Yes, to the first question, of course, the evidence to the effect would have to be in well, with new technology, there's always recordings, etc.
Ah,
But if there isn't, in the case of a elderly person or someone who may not at that moment have had access to such, then it would have to be on affidavit. And it would have to be then disputed by the other party. One thing that would surprise you, Julie, is that perpetrators actually oppose domestic violence and protection orders for reasons that are unknown. When the victim is saying, I want you to stay away from me, they are demanding that they have done nothing wrong, and they want to stay within the parameter of the victim. Now, when it comes to the issue, exactly what you are talking about, these people, we have the act, etc., but the behavior doesn't change. And what is a support system that then needs to get into action insofar as societies, whether they are faith-based organizations or community-based organizations, or generally SAPS itself providing mental health care for men who may find it themselves not even aware that insulting or belittling a child or a wife or another human being on a daily basis is perpetual and patterned behavior, which is of criminal character. So we need those kinds of interventions in order for us to find a method of taking care of the perpetrator as well. But the other thing about these pieces of legislation is the issue of harsher punishment. So these should already serve as a deterrent for a person who intends to or who is committing gender-based violence, that the likelihood of me going to jail and going for a very long time is very serious. So I should rather not, because the penalties have now increased. In the past, it wasn't taken as seriously. People would get off with a warning. People would get off with a very small little caution or whatever. Now, the sentencing and the punishment has gravely increased, which should serve to say to whoever the perpetrators out there are, enough is enough. If you're going to do the crime, you're going to have to do the time.
absolutely. Okay. In closing, then, also, you have suggested that one does need evidence. If one records the abuse without the perpetrator knowing that you're recording it on your cell phone, etc., is that permitted in a court of law, in the family courts, etc., as evidence? Because it was done without his knowledge. So you did it privately. He could argue some form of entrapment, etc. So that's the one issue. And I like what you also mentioned just now, is that our religious leaders need to start talking about this legislation in their sermons, in the Friday Jummah lectures in the masjids, etc. It's very, very important that we get this information out and circulate it as widely as possible. Your comments?
Yes, absolutely. I think that these need to be the grounds on which the legislation gains life, on which it starts to become aware that if I know that you are beating your wife or your child and I'm your neighbor, I have an obligation. It's a criminal offense if I don't report it. So I think that those are the things that are going to hold society accountable to itself. It's no longer a society where we can walk around pretending as if, I don't want to interfere. I do not want to interfere. When people are being abused in deplorable conditions, and these are things that we've been seeing, we've been experiencing, the abuse of women and children And the courts are, and the thing about the perpetrator is also the personality is usually one that is very patriarchal, very misogynistic, very narcissistic, and very arrogant, because it is the code of society's engagement with each other. But on the issue of admissibility, if a person has such admissibility of evidence where there has been a pattern, and once again, the courts and the law have ways and means to prove a pattern. So we prove a pattern. There may be an incident to say, look, on this day, this is what he did. And my children were screaming, but I recorded it because I had my phone or some other means of recording. But I could not, but those are the other incidents. And you can see that these incidents are verifiable. The testing of the evidence in terms of the second bill can be even done without the presence of the person in court, depending on the threat to life. So apart from, yes, the admissibility of evidence, which we then also reduce to affidavits and have that copied and handed in for the audience of the presiding officer. It is also important that depending on the severity of the situation, it can be supported with affidavit with other instances, but patterns. Now, in some cases, you might find, and that's where it differs from the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill to the Criminal and Sexual Offences Bill, in that one is where it's domestic between people who live together and people who are known to each other, and this is a continued form of abuse. Or it's a random example of you seeing something funny, suspicious, for example, where a person is pushed around in a wheelchair with a blanket over them, not realizing this person is being potentially human trafficked, that it also gives you the responsibility to report such. So the only thing with domestic violence, the one thing that's really important is the pattern, and that can be reduced to affidavit. And whether it is coercive, pushing, screaming, in any form that causes mental, emotional, physical harm, that is considered to be domestic violence.
And finally, very sadly, a lot of women don't come forward. They don't report the domestic violence or the abuse against them simply because it might be their spouse is the sole breadwinner, or also perhaps afraid of the repercussions after the matter goes to court. How do they protect themselves? So I want to take the matter to court. It gets resolved. He serves time or pays a fine or whatever the situation might be. He might even be sent into some sort of a rehab or counseling services. But then in some form or another, it comes back to bite me, the person who has actually laid the charge, the wife or the sister or the daughter or the neighbor, or whatever it is.
The issue with a situation of return of the offender, in that instance, what is important to note is that when a person is issued with a protection order or restraining order against the offender, there is also attached to it a warrant of arrest. So that person then, as including the offender is served, has a warrant of arrest. The process has been that should that person reoffend or approach them, go close to their proximity, they can contact the police, write an affidavit, take such affidavit to the magistrate, who will then issue the warrant of arrest, which must be executed, and the individual will be arrested. Now, I have had many matters of this nature where individuals are arrested, and fortunately, in some instances, because they can't even confirm. Remember, there are many predators out there nowadays in terms of male predators. Males who are searching for women who have been divorced or their husbands have been passed on. They are older women, or they are single women with an income. And hence what they then do is that they don't have a place to live. They move in, they start becoming abusive to the children, etc., etc. And when this person has to prove upon bail application that they have an address, the only address that they are going to give is the address that the court is preventing them from entering, which is the address of the victim. So there are many things that are there to protect women, but women have to make sure, and the police in many instances, which is why with domestic violence matters that are represented, you want to be sure that you have the protected yourself in terms of fees, because of women who will just decide, oh no, I think we're going to try and make it work, and the person ends up in hospital the next day.
Okay,
So,
my final question.
Mhm.
I'm going to have to end the interview in a minute or two, but this is very important for my understanding, Magdalene. What happens if I, as a wife, take out a protection order against my abusive husband? Once he's paid the fine or served his time, I take him back. But that protection order lasts for 10 years, am I correct? If he reoffends, does he get locked up again? And is it
the,
wise?
pro- the the
Is it
protection
wise when I
order,
take him back? Yeah.
the protection order is a lifelong order.
Okay.
There's no prescription on a protection order.
All right. I thought it was 10 years.
No, there's no prescription. So it's an order that you can decide whether you want to then withdraw or retain. Because should anything happen,
Yes.
that person becomes a first suspect in an incident that is outside of a natural cause of death.
Okay. All right. But I'm sure there are many instances where women have taken out protection orders against their spouses or partners, but continue living with them, hoping that
This
the
is,
protection order.
yes, look, there are various reasons for a protection order. For example, he might be the most wonderful husband and father to his kids, but the problem is abusive language. And all she wants to do is to protect herself and the kids against abusive verbal language.
Okay.
It's
Makes
not
sense.
what people anticipated to be, that, it's it's emotional abuse. It may be that she just wants him to stop verbally abusing her. That's it, because he doesn't physically abuse her.
Okay, Magdalene, fascinating indeed. So much more to uncover. Till the next time, it was lovely talking to you. And thank you indeed for your time.
And yourself. Shukran.
10 minutes after 9 exactly. News and views right here on Salam Media. Please stay with us. We have lots more coming your way this morning on the show. And do keep us company. Let us have your thoughts via any one of our social media platforms.